Before 0500 on the Grand Banks, the air temperature is already -16, not the forecast in the actual reading, taken from the instrument mast at the ship's bow. The vessel has been holding position since yesterday afternoon, 315 kilometers east of St. John's, over a subsea pipeline corridor on the floor of the Jeanne d'Arc Basin. Freezing spray comes off the bow in periodic sheets. The forecast was calling for it. Northwest, 35 knots, building through the morning. But the vessel holds her position without apparent effort. Beneath the hull, 6 independently controlled thrusters adjust 30 times per second, compensating for swell and wind before the drift becomes visible on any display. 2 technicians stand on the aft deck in full survival suits. They are checking the launch and recovery system, the LAS, the steel rigging that will lower the diving bell through the moon pool and into the water. Everything has already been verified 3 times. On this vessel, or that does not mean it will not be verified again. At the center of the aft deck, the moon pool is open, a rectangular opening through the hull, roughly 2 meters by 3. Through it, the North Atlantic is directly visible, moving, black, and close. The cursor frame overhead keeps the diving bell aligned and stable when the surface is running hard. In the wheelhouse, the DP officer watches the position readout. Position drift less than half a meter. He adjusts nothing, and the system is already adjusting. Out the forward windows, the horizon is gone, absorbed into low cloud, freezing spray, and the beginning of a winter dawn that will barely qualify as light. This is the Grand Banks. It does not offer conditions, it imposes them. The Labrador Current drives cold water south along the shelf edge. Where it meets the Gulf Stream, fog closes without warning and swells build quickly. Experienced mariners in these waters do not talk about the weather. They plan around it. A dive supervisor steps through the pressure-sealed hatch from the saturation complex and stops at the moon pool railing. He looks at the surface, watches it move. The water temperature below is just above 0, 1 degree Celsius. In those conditions, without a suit, a person becomes incapacitated inside of 30 minutes. The saturation complex is a row of interconnected steel pressure chambers on the main deck. Inside, 3 divers have been living since Tuesday under pressure equivalent to their working depth, roughly 80 meters of seawater. They breathe heliox, helium, and oxygen. They eat, sleep, and wait in a space barely larger than a closet. The vessel is purpose-built for this work. A monohull roughly 100 meters in length, 20 meters in beam. 3 diesel generators on an independent power bus, fuel capacity for over 30 days on station without resupply. She is not fast. She does not need to be. She holds position. That is the job. Before we continue, if this is the kind of work you want to keep watching, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around real Canadian maritime operations, the vessels, the routes, the crews, and the conditions they work in. If that matters to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us. And we want to hear from you. Did you grow up near the water in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, BC, or somewhere along the St. Lawrence? Did a family member work the fishing fleets, the Coast Guard, a cargo run, a tug? Did you spend time on these vessels yourself? Leave it in the comments. People watching this channel know these waters. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the vessel. The saturation system runs around the clock. 3 shifts, 8 hours in the water, 16 at pressure in the living chambers. The divers do not surface between rotations. Decompressing and recompressing would take longer than the working period itself. They stay at depth, do the work, and wait for final decompression when the campaign ends. At the end of a campaign, typically 2 to 4 weeks on station, decompression begins. It takes close to 3 days. The divers ascend slowly through the pressure gradient inside the living chambers, their bodies adjusting to the return to surface pressure. Until that process is complete, they cannot leave the vessel. The life support technician is one of the most critical people on the vessel. They monitor oxygen partial pressure inside the living chambers, carbon dioxide levels, temperature, and humidity. If any reading moves outside of tolerance, they respond immediately and correctly. In this work, there is no margin between a wrong response and an irreversible one. Heliox is mixed on board. Helium is stored in high-pressure cylinders in the vessel's gas farm, hundreds of bottles secured against the ship's motion. At working depths, helium eliminates nitrogen narcosis. It also changes the divers' voices, lighter, less resonant. After a few days at pressure, the crew recognizes the sound without comment. The ROV hangar sits at the stern. Inside, 2 work-class ROVs wait in their cradles, each roughly the size of a small car, each equipped with hydraulic manipulators, sonar, cameras, and inspection tooling. When the divers descend, an ROV goes with them. It watches, it assists, and if an umbilical tangles, it intervenes. Below the vessel, the seabed is approximately 80 meters down. The Grand Banks shelf is flat here, low relief, sand and silt, scattered rock outcrops, and running across it, the subsea flow lines and gathering lines of the Jeanne d'Arc Basin, Hibernia, Terra Nova, White Rose. These pipelines connect production to the offshore loading systems that put oil on tankers. Pipeline inspection on the Grand Banks is continuous work. Corrosion monitoring, free-span surveys, sections of pipe suspended above the seabed where the bottom has eroded beneath them, cathodic protection anode checks. Each line runs on a survey schedule. This vessel is here to fulfill one, not exceptional work, the scheduled maintenance that keeps the infrastructure sound. The cathodic protection system is what stands between the pipeline steel and the ocean. Zinc and aluminium anodes are bolted along the pipe's exterior, sacrificial metal that corrodes in place of the steel itself. Even when an anode depletes below acceptable limits, it is replaced. The diver locates it, measures it, and the decision is made topside. At 06:15, the dive supervisor clears the bell launch. The diving bell enters the water through the moon pool, lowered by the Lars, held steady by the cursor frame that prevents the swell from driving it against the hull. Below the surface, the motion stops. The bell descends into the calm beneath the wave action. Below the Grand Banks surface, the water is cold and dark. And at 80 meters, visibility runs between 5 and 15 meters depending on current and season. In January, it sits toward the lower end of that range. The bell drops through the water column on its umbilical. Communications, power, breathing gas, and hot water supply in a single integrated line. The hot water suit is standard in these conditions. Water is heated topside, pumped down through the umbilical, and circulated through the suit against the diver's skin. Without it, at 1 degree Celsius, effective work time would be measured in minutes. With it, the shift runs 8 hours. The engineering between those two numbers is what makes the work possible. At the seabed, the bell's hatch opens. 2 divers exit on their umbilicals and move toward the pipeline. Above them, 80 meters of cold North Atlantic and 35 knots of northwest wind running over the surface. None of that is present here. The seabed is its own world, silent, cold, and without weather. In the control room above, the supervisor watches on 2 screens. One feeds from the companion ROV. One feeds from the lead diver's helmet camera. He can hear everything through the communications panel. At this depth, in Heliox, the voices carry that characteristic quality. The supervisor has had 20 years to learn to hear past it. The inspection proceeds methodically. The diver moves along the pipeline, pressing the CP probe against each anode. measuring the electrochemical potential that indicates whether the steel beneath is protected or exposed. Each reading is logged. Back in the vessel, engineers track the numbers against the pipeline's maintenance history and model what comes next. The pipeline network on the Jeanne d'Arc Basin is not a single line, it is a system. Infield flow lines connect wellheads to production platforms. Gathering lines connect platforms to the offshore loading systems. Together, and these subsea lines carry the production of fields that have been operating for over 25 years without interruption. On the Grand Banks in January, the conditions are not marginal, they are the benchmark. Seas building to 5 or 6 meters behind a low-pressure system. Wind chill on the exposed deck, reaching -25 or worse. The decision to launch the Bell or stand down belongs to the dive supervisor. It is not made lightly. A free span is found at kilometre marker 47, and the pipe has been lifted by seabed scour, suspended above the bottom for approximately 12 metres, unsupported. The diver photographs it, measures the gap. The ROV records approach angles from both sides. Back topside, engineers review the data against the allowable stress limits for that section of line. Most findings on a survey campaign are documented and scheduled for future attention. Some require immediate intervention. An anode approaching full depletion cannot wait for next season's campaign, so the vessel mobilizes for the task. The tools are on board, the divers are at depth, and the pipeline is within reach. The seabed sets the agenda. A node replacement requires close work. The diver carries the replacement unit to the site on a rigging line from the vessel. It is bolted into place using purpose-built tooling designed for one-handed operation at depth. The water around that pipe is barely above freezing. The work is precise. The margin is not generous. At the surface, the supervisor monitors bell depth on the LR's display. The vessel's heave compensation system absorbs the hull's motion before it travels down the umbilical to the divers. A 3-meter swell becomes centimeters of movement at the bell. The engineering is exact. The divers work without knowing what the surface is doing. The afternoon watch passes without incident. The wind has come up to 40 knots, swell running 4 to 5 meters, air temperature on deck -18. She is making ice on the forward superstructure. Frost building on the radar masts, the bridge wing railings, the hull plating above the waterline. Ice accumulation on the upper structure is not a cosmetic concern. It shifts the center of gravity. In serious conditions, deck crew go out to clear it, chipping and shoveling in freezing spray and 40-knot wind. They work in pairs. Nobody goes on deck alone in these conditions. That is standing procedure on the Grand Banks in January. The third shift ends at 0200. The bell is recovered. Divers return through the transfer lock to the living chambers. They eat, they rest. In 16 hours, the same route. Transfer lock to bell, bell to seabed, seabed to the work. The pipeline does not schedule itself around the weather or the season. The pipeline data accumulates throughout the campaign. By the end, the vessel's engineers will have produced hundreds of inspection records, CP readings, to freespan measurements, photographic logs, anode depletion assessments. This documentation becomes the integrity management file for the line. It informs the next campaign and the one after that. The Jeanne d'Arc Basin fields produce oil measured in hundreds of thousands of barrels per day. That oil moves through the lines these divers have just inspected. It loads onto shuttle tankers at the offshore loading systems and leaves the Grand Banks for refineries in eastern Canada and beyond. Without the pipeline, the field stops. 315 kilometers to the west, the shore base in St. John's is planning the next crew rotation. Supply movement, equipment checks. Every dive record and inspection report generated on this vessel flows back to shore and into the regulatory framework that governs offshore operations in Newfoundland and Labrador. Nothing about this work is disconnected from land. The offshore industry off Newfoundland has employed the province since Hibernia first produced in 1997. Many of the crew on vessels like this one are Newfoundlanders. Some have fathers who fished the Grand Banks cod grounds before the fishery closed. The water is the same water. The work is different. The relationship to it is not. Dawn on the second day. The vessel is still on station. The divers in the living chambers are 3 hours from the next shift change. Everything is working, nothing has failed. In offshore work on the Grand Banks, a quiet day is the objective. This is what success looks like. Nothing happening. The last inspection point is reached at 1340. The diver photographs the final anode array, takes the last CP reading, and signals the surface. The bell is recovered. The saturation complex will begin controlled decompression when the vessel reaches harbour. The data is complete. The pipeline has been inspected. The job is done. The vessel will be back on this corridor within the year. Hey, a different campaign, perhaps a different vessel, certainly a different crew. The pipeline does not stop needing maintenance because the last crew finished. The seabed does not stabilize because this survey is complete. Another free span may develop by summer. Another anode will deplete by spring. The work continues. If this is the kind of maritime work you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. There are more vessels, more routes, and more operations still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a parent who ran supply to a remote community, a grandfather who worked the Grand Banks, someone who crewed an icebreaker or worked a harbour tug, tell us in the comments, what did they operate? Where did they work? What do you remember them saying about the job? The people who actually work these waters have stories that don't appear in any logbook. We want to hear them.